Hello and welcome to the Ravens Brawl podcast, a part of the Brawl Network. The offseason is going strong. It is Super Bowl week, but us in Baltimore, we don't care because the Ravens aren't playing, and it's the Chiefs and the Niners, two teams we're not big fans of. So we won't talk about the Super Bowl on this podcast. We're going to talk about the Ravens. We got a great guest this week. I'm your host, Dave Steinwaddle, pleased to be joined by co-host number one, the only co-host I have on this show. My apologies, Joe Schiller. How you doing?
Good, man. It's good to be back again. That loss is in the rearview mirror, man, where it's off-season time. Happy to be talking it.
I even forgot we lost, to be totally honest, because we're in the off-season mode. But here we are. Joe, I'll let you introduce our great guests, and then I'll do our ad read there.
Yeah, so we got a great guest this week. We have Bobby Trosset from 98 Rock and WBAL Radio. Bobby, how's it going, man?
Hey, guys. Yeah, appreciate you having me on. I kind of echo your sentiments on the whole matchup for Super Bowl 54 coming up this weekend in Miami. But look, as kind of the entire team has said throughout the last couple of weeks, they established something this year. And I'm really, really looking forward to OTAs and camp and how they're able to build off of what this, to me, it was a foundational 2019-2020. I know a lot of fans out there would say that what transpired in 2020 would obviously be preferred to be put in the rearview mirror, but they're going to have to learn from what happened January 11th here in Baltimore in order to buck the trend come January 2021. So looking forward to our conversation.
All right, so what we're going to do, we're going to dive into the team needs for the Ravens. We're going to do a little bit of a snake draft. We're going to have some fun with it, and then we're going to do a little question and answer segment with Bobby here in a little bit. But first, we got to pay our sponsors, Joe, and we got to talk about Fanatics. And you can go to thebearsbrawl.com/Fanatics. They got great deals. I mean, they have deals every day, anywhere from 20. I've seen up to 60% off. They got some great stuff. They got great gear. You want to get the latest Raven gear. I hear they got Lamar Jackson stuff. Go to thebearsbrawl.com/Fanatics to get all of your sports gear to get ready. Baseball season's around the corner. I know for Baltimore fans, it's baseball season's just a speed bump to football, but you can get gear there. You can just get your Ravens draft gear because that's the next thing coming up. So we're going to dive in here in a minute. We are going to do a snake draft. Each of us are going to go, and we are going to give what we think are the team needs for the Baltimore Ravens in free agency and in the draft. Just in the fairness here, everybody knows the snake draft order. I'm going to go first. Bobby will go second. Joe goes back to back. Bobby, then me. By the way, I did not pick this, so don't complain that I'm the first pick here, guys. All right? Everybody ready to? So Joe has heard enough of me complain about this. So my first overall pick for the Raven team needs is linebacker. I have said this pretty much since this show started that I have had a major issue with the linebacking group, not only just the outside linebackers, but the inside. Not enough talent there. You had to go out on the street to get a lot of your replacements to fill needs on that roster because you didn't have it originally. That needs to be a big focus this offseason. They need to redo that linebacking room. Even if you let Matt Judon go, you still need to redo the linebackers. So that is my top need in the eyes of the Baltimore Ravens. Bobby, you got pick number 2.
Yeah, I mean, look, Dave, I can't disagree with any of that. That's the one position that they really kind of had to remake and retool on the fly. And let's give some love to Eric DaCosta here because, if there was an Executive of the Year award, I think he would be the winner. I know Pro Football Talk certainly went that way for him, and deservingly so in his first season. We know he's been with the Ravens for forever, but he really, really did well and pushed all the right buttons. Anyway, when you look at the position of needs, I think certainly you have to look at linebacker just because of reality, right? Again, as I just mentioned, that was a position that was very fluid this year. Josh Bynes did a great job. LJ Fort did a great job, given the circumstances. But still, I think there's a lot of talent that at that 28 overall pick in the first round, you certainly have to go there. So I'm not going to argue against you for now, Dave.
Oh, ooh, ooh, I like that. All right, Bobby, what do you think? You got the second overall pick. What's your next need for the Baltimore Ravens?
Oh, that's right. You're going back to back. Okay, I should have memorized your screenshot that you sent me earlier. But no, I think that I'm of the belief that, and I've gotten into some arguments since the season ended on this with some fans, but I truly believe it, and that is you got to put as much talent and weapons around Lamar as humanly possible, right? I don't think he's given us anything to believe that anybody in this league will solve him in the coming days, in the coming years, whatever, meaning from a running standpoint. But if history repeats itself, Michael Vick was solved at some point. You could argue that might have been what he was doing. He hurt himself with what he was doing off the field. But I think at some point, Lamar will be solved. So to me, you have to continue to enhance as a passer. He knows that. We know that. And I think the more weapons you put in front of him, I'm going to say wide receiver. Like, let's put somebody out there that can complement Hollywood Brown, because the rookie out of Oklahoma had a really compelling first year. He obviously came out with a bang in that Miami game. If he wasn't banged up throughout the middle of the year, we could be talking about a guy who was in the conversation for some rookie awards. So I was really impressed by that. But you put more offensive talent around him, what a compliment that would be.
I have to agree to a certain extent, Bobby, and I'll ask this follow-up question to you. I've always had this feeling that I think that there's a chance that the Ravens will have trouble luring receivers in free agency. When you talk about receivers, are you looking at them probably filling that need in the draft, or getting a veteran to come in to be in this receiving group?
I was kind of thinking what they did with Boykin, not right out of the gate like they did with Marquise Hollywood Brown. I'd be shocked to see if they take a wide receiver with their 28th overall pick in the first, like they did with Hollywood. I'd be shocked. I kind of like a later on in the draft, somebody like Boykin they can develop, maybe use right away, that falls a little bit in the draft. So, look, I think that I'll be – seriously, let me just say it one more time. I'll be shocked if Eric DeCosta and company do not aid the defense in the first round.
Bobby, I'm a defensive coordinator. You just made my heart sing right now, so I'm very happy with that comment. All right, Joe, you've got 2 picks, so let's get your first pick here.
My first pick is going to be the interior offensive line, and we know this is all predicated on one decision, and that's of Marshall Yanda, whether he is going to be retiring or returning next year. I think we all wouldn't be surprised if Marshall Yanda retires. The guy's had a Hall of Fame career once it's all said and done. If he does retire, that you could make an argument that it could be one of the Ravens' top needs, maybe 1 or 2 on that list, because you're losing a Hall of Fame right guard there. And you have a lot of decisions to make on that offensive line. To me, you're looking at 2 guys who I think are locks, Ronnie Stanley and Orlando Brown Jr. on the bookend right and left tackles. You also have Bradley Bozeman, who played very well at that left guard spot. We came into the season not knowing really who was going to fill that role. He quietly filled that role for 16 games and had a great season. So my biggest thing is the interior offensive line, not just potentially replacing Marshall Yanda, but also Matt Skura. Matt Skura suffered a very gruesome knee injury in that Rams game. And there's no guarantee he's back for the start of the season. I thought Patrick McCary came in and played very well, but if you're a Ravens team that's going to be running the ball very heavily next season, do you want to bet on probably your rookie or your second-year guard, Ben Powers, at the right guard spot, and then an undrafted free agent at your center spot? It's one of those positions that the Ravens are going to have to address eventually, whether Marshall Yanda retires or not. He's on – if he comes back, he's probably got 1 more year left in the tank. But to me, it's a position that the Ravens do so well drafting, not necessarily in the first round, but through the middle of the draft and also the undrafted free agent market. So to me, we know it's all dependent on what Marshall Yanda decides to do, but either way, this is going to be a top decision and a top position of need for the Ravens.
All right. Bobby, go ahead.
Yeah, hey, I just want one comment there. First, I love that, Joe, just because the bottom line is that Marshall, just based on what we've observed, right, in these let's just think about this the last couple weeks. Marshall Yonda's coming off his 12th season in the NFL, another Pro Bowl opportunity at the guard position, and a season that he was not penalized once, not once. You think about the discipline and the skill that it takes at his age in his mid-30s to do that. Really, really impressive. And he was very, very open and outspoken about how rejuvenated he felt because of the soon-to-be MVP Lamar Jackson and what he's done for not only City, but for the team. So now, that said, just again, in what I've observed, I'm sure you guys have seen this as well, January 11th, when that game went final, everybody was stunned. The Ravens season ended abruptly for a second consecutive season, one and done. I noticed that Marshall, for whatever reason, I don't want to speculate too much, but he had a ton of family at the game, like a lot of people do in the playoffs, but they all joined him on the field post-game, and they were taking photos. It seemed like it was very reflective. And you then have his comments with Garrett Downing, Ravens Productions, after the Pro Bowl, and he was asked essentially, did this mean anything to you, given the fact that maybe there is a chance this is the last time you'll ever take the field as a professional football player? And as he always does, he's stoic. He jumps around the question a little bit, but you couldn't help but think that he is 110% giving this a lot of thought. So, Joe, I like it. I like the fact that you didn't ignore that, because if he does walk and go off into the sunset and have a Hall of Fame career, if you ask me, I know John Harbaugh would say that as well, that will certainly be a position of need. Anyway, that's all to say that I think edge rusher, the pass rushing, it was no secret that this year when they were 2-2 and you're sitting there at the end of September thinking to yourselves, oh my goodness, is this post C.J. Mosley, Zadarius Smith, et cetera, defensively, all the losses, is this too much? Is it too overwhelming? Will they be able to move on? And they go and rip off a ridiculous run for the ages. But I can remember at the end of September thinking to myself, wow, they have such a lack of pass rush right now. It is a problem, and they need to do something about it right now. Now, obviously that helps when they go ahead and bolster the middle part of the defense. That allows the secondary to start to be dominant, and it was a trickle-down effect from there, and it's all history now, right? Matthew Judon puts together a 9.5 sack season, and here we are. If Matthew Judon, they don't use the franchise tag on him, and he gets some serious money elsewhere like he's rumored of doing so, Adam Schefter put that out within the last week or so, that's a huge position of need, and I think there's a chance, again, if history repeats itself, you saw Zadarius Smith walk. There's been a history of letting guys like that position go. I know that the salary cap looks good right now, but I'll go there as my last pick.
Go ahead, Joe.
It's scary. I mean, to me, it's worrisome because last year when you had Zadarius Smith walk and obviously Terrell Suggs left as well, Brent Urban on the interior of the defensive line, you had a guy in Matthew Judon coming in who you knew could step up, still had a pretty solid season. But to me, if Matthew Judon leaves, you're looking at Tyus Bowser and Jalen Ferguson, who has one season under his belt and still has a lot to learn. Tyus Bowser going into now would be his 4th season, has progressed, but still not at that level where you think of a guy that can completely take over your pass rush. To me, it's one of those positions that the Ravens have a huge decision to make. And to me personally, the biggest decision probably of the offseason regarding Matthew Judon's future. I know we're probably going to get into it as far as the franchise tag and some potential trade talk a little bit later in the podcast. But yeah, Bobby, I think you hit it on the nail on the head. That's a huge need. I mean, Wink Martindale did a fantastic job of scheming pressure, especially when the Ravens were able to do with such a stout secondary. But at some point, you have to have guys who are generating pressure with a 4-man rush and not sending all of your safeties and your cornerbacks to the quarterback.
And I'm glad you said that, Joe, to elaborate on what you and Bobby have said. we kind of knew all year that the weakness of the Ravens was in their front seven. And honestly, if you go back to that playoff game, to me, that was where the weakness was really just highlighted, was that the front seven was just poor. Not only they couldn't get pressure on Ryan Tannehill, they couldn't stop the run, and a lot of that comes from the front seven. We know how great the Ravens secondary is, but I think a lot of people always forgot the front seven did not match what that Ravens secondary had all year. So I agree, and I think we're all in agreement. The defense has to be the priority. And I know I see a lot of Raven fans out there saying, "Oh, well, we'll go get a couple receivers." No, this isn't the year to go get a couple receivers. I'm like Bobby. If you want to get a receiver, get one in the middle rounds, but you need to reinvigorate that defense with a bunch of young talent. Even in free agency, if you're going to go target guys and you're willing to give up the comp picks, Joe, in my mind, it has to be young guys. You have to get guys that are going to be there for 3 or 4 years and not just a 1 or 2 year veteran. And I have the utmost faith that Eric DaCosta will do that. So I'll give my last pick, Joe, and then you can have the final say before we move on. I think the interior defensive line is a big, big need. I think you can let Michael Pierce go, in my opinion, and get somebody that's going to provide some pressure up the middle. To your point about the pressure with the front four, if you watch the Ravens defense, they really only got pressure off the edge and when they blitzed up the middle. They didn't get any pressure really from their defensive down linemen, except for the occasional Brandon Williams when the quarterback stepped up into him sort of sacks. I think that's where they really need is to get a pass rusher inside to be able to put that pressure on the quarterback up the middle, because it's very easy to take the edge pressure out of the way. They can just run a Matt Judon or whoever you sign out of the way. It's tougher to do it when you have a guy coming up the middle right into your lap. That throws a quarterback off, and the Ravens haven't had that. And the only way they got it was having to blitz secondary guys. You got to get somebody in the interior of that defensive line that's going to provide more pressure than Brandon Williams and Michael Pierce.
Yeah, I completely agree with you there. It's Brandon Williams coming on 31 years old now, has never been a big sack guy in his career. I think he has about 6.5 total sacks, and Michael Pierce is an unrestricted free agent to be. And I, in my personal opinion, don't think he'll be back in Baltimore this year. There's a couple other guys that you could potentially sign, like Justin Ellis and Domata Peko, who might honestly have his career might be done after this. I mean, he did sign with the Ravens kind of off the street and was a big contributor on the defensive line towards the middle of the season, late going into the playoffs. But yeah, Dave, I completely agree with you. Going into this final pick for me, it's a position that we don't really ever talk about as a position of need for the Ravens. But to me, it's special teams, and they've had such a stout reputation going back so many years, especially since John Harbaugh took over as a former special teams coordinator. And I'm not specifically looking at the punt or the kicking team. I'm looking at the return game and the coverage game. It was 2 spots that I thought were very underwhelming for the Ravens this year. The Ravens shuffled between returners this year, starting out with Cyrus Jones. And ending the season just with D'Anthony Thomas. And there were times where I saw a guy who we saw out of Oregon that had so much speed, so much explosiveness, and there really wasn't any of that for the Ravens in the return game. And luckily the offense really did thrive this year under Lamar Jackson, but they weren't put in the best field position starting out. And for the coverage team, there are a lot of factors that play into it. You do cut Justin Bethel for a compensatory pick. You also have a guy like Deshaun Elliott, who's one of your top special teams guys who you lose to a knee injury. You have a guy like Chuck Clark, who has to get promoted to strong safety once Tony Jefferson gets injured. So there are a lot of moving pieces where the Ravens did lose guys. But that's just a position of need that we don't really talk about for the Ravens because it has just been a stout position for them. But it's worrisome for me going forward, and it's something they need to address, because as good as a team you can be, when it comes down to those clutch moments in the playoffs and those one-score games, special teams can be the difference there. And I'm sure John Harbaugh, as a former special teams coordinator, has to be frustrated with how they played this year. And I'm guessing he'll probably be a concerted effort to make that one of the big improvements for them this offseason.
Yeah, I completely agree. Bobby, maybe you feel differently about it, but I think the special teams was god awful pretty much last year. It was the worst special teams I've seen in a long time as a Raven fan.
Well, all you had to do was listen to John Harbaugh for a couple minutes in his post game pressers. I mean, he was very adamant, and even some conversations that we had with him off the air before he came on the post game show with us on outside the locker room. I think that he understands the importance of that, and he was pretty ticked off. It was pretty clear that was a huge problem. And Joe, you mentioned the return game. Truly non-existent. Like you said, Cyrus Jones did not work out for him. He gets cut, and then they bring in DeAnthony Thomas, and Justice Hill even got some reps there as well. Didn't quite seem too comfortable there. Although I got to be honest with you, I am high on Justice. Got to know him a little bit this year. He's a locker room type of guy. He wants to learn. And it's funny, I was joking with him. I said, dude, you get on any other team pretty much, right? And you might be the backup running back. Not on this team, not on this historic running back team, which was really, really something. But no doubt about it, Joe. I think you're right on with special teams. And really, John Harbaugh, he's going to do something about that. His voice obviously matters in this process, and they definitely have to bolster that because this year was unacceptable. He'd be the first to tell you that.
All right, so Bobby, was there any needs that you think the Ravens have that we didn't mention in our snake draft here?
Oh, we covered a decent amount here. I think it seems as if we're all in agreement with the linebacker position. Or Joe, are you on board with that being first and foremost? Seems like Dave and I are.
I think to me it's pass rusher.
Jesus, Joe.
Yeah, I mean that's just it just all depends on what they do with Matthew Judon, and I do have faith in Don Martindale to be able to scheme up pressure, and the Ravens have done a good job of locking up Marcus Peters for an extension, and Marlon Humphrey's probably next in line there. And you have decisions to make on Jimmy Smith and some other guys, but I think you can make an argument for both. I'm not going to argue with you guys about inside linebacker as well because I think that's just important. And they need a replacement to C.J. Mosley. It's kind of crazy we're saying that almost, a year later from when he left, but they still haven't found that guy. Patrick Owasso is going to be an unrestricted free agent. You sign LJ Ford to an extension, but he's not a guy who you expect to be your number one linebacker there. So, yeah, I mean, I'm not going to argue with there for the sake of conversation. I'll put the pass rusher there for number one for me.
Dave, here's what I'll say, Dave. I'm looking at a list right now in front of me of the free agents. And look, the bottom line here is, make no mistake about it, this defense is going to look dramatically different come September. I mean, really. Matthew Judon obviously headlines the group, as we've mentioned. Jimmy Smith is involved in there. John Harbaugh made a point in his exit interview a couple weeks ago now that he wants Jimmy to be a part of this team moving forward, and I agree with him. Michael Pierce is on that list. The aforementioned Patrick Owasso, Seth Roberts, Anthony Levine, Pernell McPhee, who was injured with that triceps injury. D'Amato Pecco, who was picked up, as we mentioned, in the latter half. And guess what? They got Eric DeCosta. This is why I was praising Eric DeCosta earlier, because they were able to soak up every last bit of the guys that they brought in on a whim. Obviously, really, that was headlined by Marcus Peters, and now he'll be here for the next few years, which is a great signing by Eric DeCosta. Also on that list, Josh Bynes, we've talked about him, Brennan Trawick, Chris Moore, Jihad Ward. So this is a big, lengthy list, and I really do think that we're going to be looking at a significantly, vastly different roster come September.
I agree, and it reminds me almost of what they did with the offense a year or two ago with getting rid of guys like Michael Crabtree, John Brown, and revitalizing it with a lot of young talent. Marquise Brown, Mark Andrews, Hayden Hurst over those 2 years. Lamar Jackson, making that transition into what they've built offensively. I think you're going to see that with the defense this year. I think you're going to see a lot of new talent. I think a lot of young talent's going to come in. I mean, they'll pick and choose their free agents, but I think a lot of the defense is going to come via the draft, especially at that linebacker and even at that pass rush position. I think they'll get a lot of young, studs to put in that defense to revitalize it. And to your point, Bobby, I think you're absolutely right. You'll have a different looking defense going into next season outside of the secondary. Now, here's a need that I've been thinking of, Joe, that we didn't mention. It's not a huge need. It's not a need that honestly comes right to the forethought, but I think they need another offensive tackle. They didn't really have one. I mean, they had James Hurst, who the term swing guard, swing tackle, I call him a tweener, is basically what James Hurst is. They didn't have another tackle, and you got to start to look ahead a little bit if you're the Ravens and go, okay, well, Ronnie Stanley's a free agent next year. If we can't get him signed to a long-term contract extension before that time, we're going to run the possibility of losing him because the offensive line across the NFL play is not very good at times. Teams are going to fork up a lot of money. If Ronnie Stanley even sniffs that, or his agent, there's a good chance next year you don't re-sign Ronnie Stanley. I think you need to at least consider maybe bringing in a young kid late round and try to see if you can develop him into potentially being a tackle, looking to the future, saying, hey, we may lose Ronnie Stanley. We need to have a backup plan there in case that happens.
I don't know, man. I don't think the Ravens even let Ronnie Stanley even sniff the free agent market. For the way he played this year at an all-pro level and one of the best left tackles in the game, I mean, use what money you can to get him to stay in Baltimore, especially protecting Lamar Jackson's blind side. That is so important to a young quarterback developing in today's game, to have that left tackle as stout as Ronnie Stanley has been, and even Orlando Brown Jr. on the right side. So I agree with you that they can add some depth there. They do a good job of finding those guys and trying to develop them, and ever so often they do hit on them. But man, if they even, I trust Eric DeCosta is just going to lock up Ronnie Stanley. And we talked to Brian McFarland from Russell Street Report last week, and he kind of pointed to the Ravens have done a lot of their offseason work already during the season. Eric DeCosta has been a big proponent and said publicly that he wants to sign guys and lock up their young talent long-term before they even hit the free agent market. Ronnie Stanley's going to hit his fifth-year option next year. So the Ravens do have some wiggle room there. He is still a prime candidate that Brian said he could be extended this year. We talk a little bit about the Ravens free agents cap space. They have around 28, 29 million, which is flexible for what they've had in recent years. But let's not act like they're going to be winning some bidding wars here. They'll be going up against teams with 80 to $100 million in cap space. But you also consider all the people that the Ravens have already re-signed to this point. So Ronnie Stanley's a guy that I think they either lock up the end of this offseason or try to make headway at the beginning of next year, because you can't let a guy like that go. Absolutely not.
And let me just say, I do think they re-sign him, but I also think you have to have a contingency plan. That's just how I think as a coach, and how I would think as a GM. Okay, I need to play out the worst case scenario here, because trust me, Joe, I did that plenty this year as a coach. But I want to transition to the Matt Judon discussion. It was a very interesting report Sunday from Adam Schefter that there was a belief that the Ravens may franchise tag Matt Judon in an effort to trade him to try to acquire more assets, whether a player or in the draft. Bobby, I'll start with you. How likely do you think this is of a scenario for the Ravens to potentially use the franchise on Judon to trade him?
It wouldn't surprise me. You see a guy who, he showed up and showed out this year. We know that. I already mentioned that earlier on in the pod. The 9.5 sack season. He was violent and physical off the edge, and really provided a spark when they truly needed it after that kind of sputter to start off the season. That said, I mean, look, again, history might repeat itself here, and he is a viable candidate for. He's still young. He just finished up his 4th season, and I do think that there's an absolute possibility of that. Look, I think that I couldn't help but notice in the locker room after the Titans loss, there was an understanding that guys' futures were certainly up in the air. Remember the council, right, guys? I believe Patrick Owasu was in that. Judon, Anthony Levine. And am I missing somebody?
I think Marlon Humphrey was trying to get into it, never could.
All right. So it revolves around those three guys, I think. And they were all huddling together at the end. And really, we're having what seemed to be like a pretty serious conversation. They knew that some tough decisions are going to have to be made. And I would not be surprised if Judon's right at the top.
Yeah,
I agree with you. From what people have reported as well, that the Ravens and Judon have already talked and tried to reach an extension. They obviously haven't gotten to that point. And then if you keep a guy on a franchise tag for 1 year and still don't make any headway, and you risk losing him after this season, then you could trade him while he's hot and try to get those draft assets. And Dave, I kind of want to get your thought on this too. I mean, the Ravens do covet their draft picks, and there's a chance that they could trade Matthew Judon on the franchise tag and still go out and try to acquire another pass rusher in this scenario.
The only thing that gives me pause about this is I have a feeling this might end up being a trend. Like I wouldn't be surprised if like Jacksonville doesn't do this, Tampa Bay doesn't do this, and the Jaguars would do it with Ngakoue, Shaquille Barrett in Tampa. There are some pass rushers out there. My worry if you do this is would you get backed into a corner where you wait too long, you let other guys sign, you can't move them, and then you can't fill other needs because you have this huge cap hit that sucked up so much of your cap space. I mean, it's a nice idea. I think if you can find the right team that's desperate, I think it works. But it feels like you can get backed into a corner doing this sort of business, and I'm just not sure that Eric DeCosta wants to be put in a corner, if you know what I mean. He'd rather have control and all the cards on his side and not have to be sitting there going, well, if nobody takes Judon, we can't really go out and fill any of our other needs because he's got a 16 or whatever it is cap hit on our salary cap, and it's eating up 90% of the cap room we have. I don't know if he wants to get backed into that without knowing that he's got a deal in place. I think that would have to be the big thing in my eyes, is he would have a deal in place to trade Judon before putting the tag on him.
Yeah, I agree. And the Ravens can do a couple different things with this. They can rescind the franchise tag anytime before the May deadline and still get a compensatory pick if they can't pull off the tag and trade, which I think is interesting. The Panthers did something very similar, getting a third rounder for losing Josh Norman. It's all about what Eric DeCosta could think he could get for Judon on the market. We've seen a couple of scenarios where if you're looking at what the Houston Texans did with Jadeveon Clowney last year, you'd be very disappointed if you were the Ravens and that was the scenario. But then you look at guys like Frank Clark and Dee Ford that have a little bit more compensation associated with those trades, but they've been more consistent as pass rushers up to that point than Matthew Judon. The free agent market can get so inflated, and Zadarius Smith got $16 million plus a year last year on the free agent market. And credit to him, I didn't think the Ravens should have necessarily kept him around. But, man, if you talk about a guy who's worked his ass off to get to that point and get to, Pro Bowl season and legitimate talk about a potential defensive player of the year for how well he played. Bobby, I wanted to ask you if the Ravens do go the tag and trade route and do try to deal Matthew Judon, from your perspective, is there a draft pick, I guess a draft pick range that you'd be happy about and say that I think this was worth it? Are we looking at is a third rounder better good to you, or what kind of draft compensation would you be happy with that the Ravens could get for Matthew Judon?
Well, I think this is about as unpredictable as it gets if you think about some of the in-season trades that Eric DeCosta was able to pull off, namely the Kari Vedvik ordeal earlier in the season. I still can't believe what they get. They get a fifth rounder in exchange for that, I think.
Yeah, it was he bounced around about just about every team after that. Absolutely insane.
It's still wild to me the way that shook out, but yeah, I think a third rounder would be solid, and maybe some. I don't know. I haven't given it a whole lot of thought there, but I know what I do know is that Eric DeCosta
is absolutely. He's proven. I know it's a small sample size, but it's proven that he can absolutely negotiate. He can foresee things. He's very, very smart in the management chair. So if they do end up losing Matthew Judon, look, he's going to soak him up for everything he was worth, especially this season. Look, get him while it's hot, right? 9.5 sacks, as we've mentioned a couple times now throughout the pod. Judon wants to get paid. That's the bottom line. He is willing to walk. Based on some conversations that I had throughout the season with him off camera, he's a professional. You know, he wants to. He understands that right now is his time. So, and I think that DaCosta understands that too, in terms of, hey, we got to get the most bang for our buck right now. And I think that's at the very least, a third rounder.
All right, so Bobby, you've been working at WBAL radio for a couple months now. You're on the morning show with Justin Scott and Spiegel on 98 Rock. I got to ask, what's it like being on with those guys every day? Because they sound hilarious on our end.
Well, first of all, Dave, I'm glad it resonates, because sometimes you sit there and you're thinking, man, how am I coming across right now? Because I'm just trying to survive with these guys, you know? But no, they've been huge for my development. It's no secret that this was a big break for me. I've been very outspoken about that. And, you know, I started in August and really couldn't have drawn it up any better the way things shook out this year. You know, I just, this run was unprecedented. What Lamar did was unprecedented. The MVP award has all been in his hands. And as I mentioned at the top, I really think that this was a foundational year. So to have had a front row seat, to have hosted the pre and the post game shows, to have been up in Owings Mills pretty much every day from August to January was a blessing. And the JSS guys are they're exactly what they are on the air, off the air. You know, that's they bring the heat. I think it's pretty clear that they were tough on me right out of the gate. I knew that I needed to come in with some thick skin and be able to laugh at myself, and I hope I've done that. But you know, it's a lot of fun. We have a good time. You just never know. You have to always be on your toes, I've learned. If you're not, you better just pack your bags. But they've been around the block for quite some time now. They really have. And, you know, once I got over the hours, you know, we're getting up and I'll be getting up and we're taping this, right? So it's a little late right now. I got to get in bed pretty soon. But now you learn to just you just love it. And I think that, you know, having somewhat of a voice and playing a small role in the coverage this season of the Ravens was just a total blast.
Yeah, and piggybacking off that a little bit, for you to be at the Castle throughout the entire season and to be around Lamar Jackson, you have a unique perspective that us fans don't necessarily have of being around a guy like that. Not just when we see him on the field and hear him on interviews, but just around him throughout the entire time. You know, from a perspective like that, we hear such great things about Lamar Jackson. You know, what can you speak to what you've seen so far throughout him, just not as a player as well, but just as a person around the Castle, just interacting with about everyone?
Yeah, I was really impressed. You know, he's a few weeks into being 23. I know he's hosting a big welcome home bash in Florida coming up this weekend before the Super Bowl. So he's going to have a good time, let his hair down a little bit, if you will. But he was so generous and so open with us. When I say us, Pete Gilbert, Keith Mills, and myself hosting the post-game show, he kind of opened himself up. He was very compelling and so informative. You know, he's able to just tell you what he was doing during this crazy season, dumb it down for the average fan who may not know football terms, football schemes, and what he did for this city. You know, I don't really, honestly, whatever happens from here on out with Lamar, and obviously we all hope the best for him, and you hope that he turns out to what he's expected to be in the league, and that is an all-time great, let's face it. The numbers that he has entering year 3 and his first full season as a starting quarterback now in the rearview mirror, he is on a historic pace right now. And the fact that he will become the youngest MVP since Jim Brown in 1957 speaks for itself. But what I really want to say, as impressed as I was, flabbergasted and jaw dropped and all that by what he did on the field and the jukes and the precision passing, kind of silencing all the critics, and the viral moments with John Harbaugh, namely in Seattle, going for it on 4th and short. And the phrases, right? The big trust, the believe that, all that, whatever. To me, what put it all over the edge is what he did for the city. No secret that Baltimore struggles in a lot of ways. It's a tough period right now. It's a tough era when we're looking back, hopefully in 20 years, hopefully less than that. You will look at these times. This was a tricky, tough, rugged time to be in Baltimore. So when you put Lamar Jackson, a black young quarterback, coming in and uniting a city the way he did, I'll forever remember that. That's how the way my career started, having a front row seat to a guy who is so humble. His humility is incredible. He stays within himself. He united a locker room. And I think the best testament to who he is seeing what he does off the field, right? And the impact that he has on some of the veterans. Mark Ingram wouldn't be down in Miami right now on Radio Row going around singing his praises if he didn't truly feel that way. It's the off season. It's a couple weeks removed now. He could be chilling on his own in the tropical islands of wherever with his family instead of talking about Lamar Jackson on Radio Row, but that's what he's doing. So he not only inspired that locker room, he inspired the city of Baltimore, and he's beloved here. He really is. And I think I speak for a lot of people in terms of the optimism and positivity heading into year 3 and just his second full season as a starting quarterback.
Couldn't have said it any better ourselves, Bobby. That was well put. So we're gonna have I have 2 kind of fun questions here for you, Bobby, to wrap this one up. You mentioned the castle, Joe. I don't know if you've been in the castle in the park. I gotta ask Bobby because I've been a couple times. Have you eaten in the cafeteria at the castle before? I mean, it's incredible there. I got to know if you've eaten in there.
Oh, hell yeah. Kevin
there you go.
Rocklitz. Oh, yeah. Kevin Rocklitz was nice enough to, in my first couple weeks starting out, getting under my feet, he invited me in for lunch, and I'm actually going to go meet up with Jay O'Brien, VP of Broadcasting, who just does a hell of a job. I've got to shout out Jay, fellow Loyola University graduate. We're going to catch up next week. But, Dave, I can report back to you 100%. In August, it was phenomenal, and I expect it in February to be just as good.
Oh, yeah. The couple of times I have gone, it just, first off, I'm in awe on just how big this place is. And then second off, the food is outstanding. That's why every year when we announce the Ed Block winner, I have to go because I just want to go sit in the cafeteria because the food is so good. Joe, have you had the pleasure of being in there?
Yeah, I was actually there last week. I kept myself modest to the salad bar and the sandwich bar, but it is an incredible place to be. It's actually my first time at the castle last week, meeting up with some of the staff there. You couldn't ask for a better facility for the Ravens and just a nicer group of people there. When you talk about a top-notch facility for an NFL team, that is it. You take a write-off onto one winning drive, and you're looking at a giant mansion. That place is absolutely incredible, and the Ravens have a high reputation for all things considered for a reason there.
Oh yeah, it is a fantastic place. Actually, the last time I went to the castle, I didn't even get into the castle, so that should tell you just how good of a place it is. I was stopped at the front door as I was making a delivery, but that's a whole nother story for another time. And Bobby, my last question: you did the polar bear plunge a couple weeks ago. Who convinced you to do it, and how much fun did you have?
Okay, to no one's surprise, this somehow goes back to JSS, Justin Scott and Spiegel. How about that?
There you go.
Everything stems back to those guys, I found. But I was in the first month, and I was kind of in new employer say yes mode, if you will. And of course, on air, they pressured me into, dude, you're definitely going to be available and ready to go with the polar bear plunge, I think they called it at the time. And here I am. Yeah, I went to Loyola. I guess I'm somewhat of a Marylander, but I had absolutely zero idea what that was. To me, it was a one-time thing that you just jump in January like we do in upstate New York. That's where I'm originally from, Lake George. And so I was like, heck yeah, whatever. I'm in say yes mode. Yeah, I'll do that. And sure enough, I find out in the coming months, no, dude, this is 24 hours, once an hour, 424 straight in the Chesapeake Bay, Sandy Point State Park. It's all for a phenomenal cause. But wind chills were in the teens. The temperatures were below the teens. And it was quite something. But in all seriousness, really, really glad I did it. I appreciate you asking, Dave, because I ended up raising about, I'm not sure where my final number came in. I think it was right over just north of 7,000. So it all goes to Special Olympics of Maryland. Met a lot of great people, inspired me a lot. And I'm actually going to be doing some broadcasting for their state basketball tournament too. So looking forward to that in March.
All right,
Yeah,
I'm all out.
Yeah, that's an incredible cause. And we kind of want to wrap up things with just one more question for you, Bobby. You've done a lot of player interviews, coach interviews for the post game show. Do you have a favorite? Did you have one that really stuck out to you this season?
Well, for starters, I don't think that you can ever discount a John Harbaugh interview. I think that he is one of the most thoughtful and respectful head coaches in the league. The first thing I always observe and notice at the start of his actual general media post-game press conferences or any press conference from that matter, he thanks all the reporters for being there. And then typically either starts with an open statement or just asks them what they have. So that was one of my first observations upon starting. But putting Harbaugh aside, just assuming that you guys want a player, I'd probably go with Orlando Brown Jr. He was extremely, being that he's a Baltimore native and he was a Pro Bowl alternate this year and so outspoken about his late father and the impact that he had on his football career and continues to have this day. And then the Ravens productions team goes with him to his elementary school in season, and he spends some time with them and he speaks to them and poured his heart into that. And I was really, really moved by just him as a person. And he's still young too. I want to say he's like 23. So I'm a huge OBJ fan, not the guy in Cleveland there. But he also is your Media Good Guy award winner as well from local media. So a huge fan of him. And then look, I kind of wanted to go off the beaten path, so I went with somebody that you may not expect. But some of the interviews that we had with Mark Ingram were really, really phenomenal. I think you cannot understate it. He is so happy to be in Baltimore. And that says something too. You think about the pedigree that he was coming from and the success and the career that he had in New Orleans with Drew Brees and Sean Payton. And for him to be picked up in the offseason, that might go down, especially if they can win a title under his tenure here. That may go down as one of the biggest offseason pickups in Ravens franchise history. Not only for what he did off the field, obviously inspiring the whole big trust movement, and the come meet me at the bank with Lamar Jackson's MVP candidacy, but what he did on the field too. Obviously a huge part and over 1,000 yards rushing. And two, I think we cannot forget, this was a historic rushing campaign that these guys put together, led by Greg Roman, pushing all the right buttons. And definitely a bright sign, the fact that they were going to be retained, Greg Roman and Wink Martindale. That's huge. I thought that maybe that they might get scooped up by somebody, but not this year. It was a down year, too, in coaching vacancies, I think, compared to previous years. So, that's what I'd give you that on that.
All right, Bobby, that is it for us. We got no more questions. Thank you so much for coming on. We would love to have you on again to talk some more Ravens and just have some fun with it.
You know how to reach me, guys. I appreciate you thinking of me.
All right, so that is going to do it for us here on the Ravens Brawl. Joe and I will be back next week with a brand new episode as we roll on through the off season. For Bobby Trosset, for Joe Schiller, I'm Dave Steinmutl. Have a great week. Watch the Super Bowl. Try to enjoy it, Raven fans. We'll talk to you next week.